Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size. Never gonna happen. No. I took that hit like Pacquiao.
By Will Smith. Chris got slapped in the face. When it happened, I thought it was fake.
Dave Chappelle is going after Will Smith again, but this time, it's gone further than anyone expected. Ever since the Will Smith Oscars slap, Will has remained a constant target in Chappelle's routines. But now, there are growing whispers that even his son may be getting pulled into the spotlight. So how far is Dave Chappelle willing to go? And is there anything Will Smith can actually do about it? Join us as we break down Dave Chappelle's latest comments and why they have everyone talking. The moment that changed everything. For many years, Will Smith has dominated headlines and had the world at his feet. However, his life was about to change in ways that he didn't think were possible. The world watched the famous Prince of Bel-Air dazzle as King Richard. So when he got that Oscar nomination, the stage was set. Fast forward to the Academy Awards night in 2022. Will was ready to take the world by storm, possibly winning his very first Oscar award in the Best Actor category. A moment he had waited for all his life was staring him in the face, but little did he know the gifts the night held. An Oscar, on one hand, was not a bad idea, but what else was the night promising? Drama. The Oscars had planned for an unbelievable night, filled with fun and crossed lines, and they found the perfect host, Chris Rock. From the outside, it seemed like missing the Oscars that night was completely non-negotiable. The atmosphere was set, the ambiance was classy, and Chris Rock was the show host. He was brought along to force this classy crowd into serious laughter, a wine spill, and aching ribs. However, what they did not count on was Chris's ability to pierce through the thickest skins. He was amazing at that, just like Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, Cat Williams, and basically any comedian worth their salt. The evening started with Chris Rock, ripping into everyone and making the night as fun as possible.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
There was laughter, and the mood was lofty until that one moment. Chris's eye had darted through the room and found Jada Pinkett Smith, Will's wife, with a bald head. She was suffering from alopecia, but when it came to Chris, no one was really safe, were they? He immediately lunged into her, with the crowd absolutely going wild when he commented on her baldness. But big old Will was not having it. He knew the risks. The alarm bells went off in his head, but Chris seemed to really get to him. So he left his seat and did the unthinkable. He smacked Chris right in the face, and right there was the moment of the night.
Oh, wow! Wow! Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Not the awards, not the guest, not the red carpet, but a direct assault on an Oscar presenter. Although he was not present at the party, he was watching from a distance as everything he had been fighting for, specifically cancel culture, was about to explode again, and he blamed only one person, Will Smith. Dave had always respected him, but at that critical moment, just minutes before he received his award, he showed the world who he really was. Many who watched the drama unfold believed Dave was coming for Will, but whether Dave just takes the fight to Will or any further remains to be seen. But this wasn't about just a slap. It was about something deeper in the comic world. Comedy's dark night. Comedy just hits right when it comes from Dave Chappelle, doesn't it? The raw anecdotes, the cutting sense of humor that immediately gets you out of your seat to applaud or punch him in the face, and that smile at the end of every punchline. But those are just the blurred lines that real comedians cross, somewhere between truths and offense, half-truths and inferences, and sometimes just witty exaggerations. At least Dave thinks so. But is he alone in his thoughts? Not exactly. Over time, pop culture has placed Dave Chappelle on a supremely high pedestal alongside names like Cat Williams, Bernie Mac, Bill Burr, and Chris Rock. These names went from jokers, looking to poke silly fun, to men who playfully call out the farce, specifically discussions that no one else in the world would dare to say, at least not out loud. Dave has been putting out fires and landing the jabs where it hurts since he burst onto the scene. Sketches like Prince playing basketball and Rick James had set him on the map for fame, as they seemed accepted by the United States almost without any form of compromise. However, This somewhat triggered Dave into deep thoughts. He imagined what else he could get away with. And who decided that? So he began to test the waters, with a little joke about race here, a simple discussion about society there, and a punchline that just packed enough heat to make it all explode in everyone's faces. It was new, unexpected, and brave, and seemingly comedy was entering a brave new society where anyone could talk about anything as long as they had enough to make it humorous, and no one did it better than Dave Chappelle. Just like that, for a few more decades, it seemed comics' freedom didn't come at a cost, which makes Will's action even more dangerous. Who would have thought that a joke about baldness would someday result in assault? A line was crossed. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But it gets even worse. This did not happen at a pub or some dinner party after a rigorous award night. Will descended on Chris at the Oscars, one of the world's biggest stages. Although the hit was directly on Chris, the shockwave reverberated across the comedy world, with Cat Williams, Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, and all the comedy greats feeling the aftermath of a direct hit that could send comedians back into silence. But the real question is, how will the comic world react to this? Has Will Smith just landed a hit that puts him, his son Jaden, and his whole family in the comic world's bullseye? Will Smith's attempts at reparations. While social media capitalizes on Will Smith's actions, describing it as the perfect springboard to launch a cancel culture against comedians, Will saw it differently. He saw a 53-year-old man acting like a child, throwing his toys out of the pram because a comedian made a joke. He knew he had made an error, even though it came during the heat of the moment. That was no excuse, and Will knew it too. So he reached out to Chris Rock, hoping to mend bridges and somehow find common ground again. But is there really a way back from slapping a fellow professional on stage? Will was not sure what response he would get, if any, but he made the effort, with Chris now being expected to make his own move. While all this happened, Dave watched in silence as Will's attempts to mend bridges progressed. But everything changed when Chris Rock responded. He was not willing to have a conversation. According to Will, Chris said he would reach out to him whenever he felt ready to have a conversation. Obviously, he was furious, getting slapped for telling a joke. But more importantly, especially to Chris, it happened in front of a lot of other races in there. Many had asked the question of why Chris never fought back, and he said in the most cryptic Chris Rock way, implying that he was not going to fight another black dude in front of white people because his parents had advised him against it as a child, and he saw some serious sense in it. Whether that was true or he just considered his odds against the men in Black Star and didn't deem them favorable, it remains a continuous conversation on social media. Will claimed that his biggest mistake was not thinking about how many people his actions hurt. At the moment, it was just a slap to him, but the shockwave landed in the most difficult places for him. Apparently, he used to be friends with Chris's brother, Tony Rock, but he claimed that he immediately felt the cord of their friendship severed after his actions. Also, he talked about Chris's mother, claiming that he watched her in an interview, discussing how much he hurt her by slapping her son. I spent the last 3 months replaying and understanding the complexities and nuances of what happened, Will explained. Although he claimed he was distressed by the situation, making his mistakes public and almost seeking reparations as he faced penance, the comic world was not ready to move on. Not Chris Rock, not Bill Burr, and most definitely not Dave Chappelle. What's next for Will Smith, and how has his family been affected by this? The Smith family bears the brunt. The Smith family has been in the media their entire lives, mostly for positive reviews. A cool dad, who was the face of the classic Prince of Bel-Air. A cool mom with a serious career in television, who used to date Tupac Shakur. And kids, who keep the Smiths' name in the media, with Willow killing it in music and Jaden being the perfect socialite. However, this illusion of perfection was soon shattered to pieces when Will landed that slap. Immediately, he was banned from the Academy Awards for assaulting a presenter, and then he voluntarily resigned from the Academy Awards, seeking penance, and was happy to take any punishment that he would be given. But more importantly, how did his family react to the incident? Jada, who was the butt of Chris's joke on the night, did not believe that it was real. She claimed she believed at the time it was a well-planned skit, boys being boys. But when she found out it was more than a joke, it was too late. Will had just invited some serious heat to the family, and she did not think his actions were right. However, it gets bleaker for the family when a video of Jada's eye roll before the incident happened is caught on camera. No words were spoken, and lips weren't read, but the media had somehow interpreted a non-linguistic eye roll as a deliberate call to action, spurring Will onto the stage. Many people described it as the "stand up and defend your wife" look. However, Will had stepped out, claiming that Jada had nothing to do with his actions. "I'm sorry, babe. I want to say sorry to my kids and my family for the heat that I've brought on all of us," Will said. But the question continues to escalate. Was Will saying this to save Jada and his kids? Did he really just do this without thinking of his family first? But here is where it gets twisted. Willow Smith believed that her father was only being human and appreciated him for it. Because of the position that we're in, our humanness sometimes isn't accepted, and we're expected to act in a way that isn't conducive to a healthy human life and isn't conducive to being honest, she added. Although she had not outrightly rejected her father's behavior, she also was not supporting it. She sat on the fence and gave her a rather cryptic reply. The backlash came in all shapes and sizes, but she claimed that she did not feel any of them deeply. Although she had kept her answers as cryptic as possible, her brother was different. Jaden, immediately after the situation, posted on social media, "That's how we do it," firmly in his father's corner. His words were precise, and they cut deeply. On social media, the comic world did not take too kindly to his comments either. It leaves one to wonder how they just might react to Jaden's post. Dave explodes. Dave had always been known for going up against ideals that he didn't necessarily like unapologetically. Hence, there was almost no doubt that he was coming for Will. As expected, fans of cancel culture asked the question on everyone's mind. Was Dave's job so much fun for him to go after Will, even though the latter had assaulted Chris? But Dave had been asked the same question a million times and had always had the same answer. "My job isn't fun. I am." The point of the comment was to help anyone understand that he had dedicated his life to fighting the cancel culture, regardless of who or what the perpetrator might be. For some context, he had developed numerous sketches on LGBTQ issues, racial prejudice, and just about any other social topic anyone could think of. However, his biggest disdain came for bullies. He had some really serious hate for people or corporations imagined in that light, and that's exactly how he saw Will. Dave had a special way of dealing with bullies, and his 2008 fight with Comedy Central was the perfect example. He declared their decision to release materials he had filmed before their contract ended, calling it a bullying move. Although the 52-year-old had consistently described himself as a man who never punches people down or forces them into submission, the queer community had continually described him as a monster who bullied them at every chance he got. However, sources close to Dave confirmed that he had a new mission, centered on Will. So after Dave went on a tour with Chris, he went ahead and did a special called The Dreamer, where he talked about the realities of the vulnerability comedians already face, without Will Smith adding to it. He made a special example of himself by getting attacked by a fan, and he actually fell, looking over to his bodyguard for help. He created a parallel between his events and Chris's. He believed that he let his guard down because he saw someone he thought was a friend approaching him, but with a completely different intent. While the slap completely hurt Chris,
Oh, wow!
Dave claimed that it wasn't the worst part of the night. For him, Will enjoyed the rest of the night a little too much, not caring at all what had happened just a couple of minutes ago. To him, that was a breaking point, and he felt disappointed that no one had called it out. But it wasn't long before questions began to swirl around the topic. Will had all the time in the world to apologize to Chris while he was still at the Oscars, especially when he got on the stage to receive his award, but he didn't. And just like that, Dave set the world on fire with an observation and a little humor. But Will being the brunt of the joke was only the beginning. Dave seemed to have taken an interest in Jaden. But what exactly made Jaden the proper dude to poke fun at? Chatty Jaden. The internet is a warehouse for memories that just never go out of stock, and the Smith family, who had been in the media business for more than 3 decades, definitely knew that too. However, Jaden did not think about that before he remarked. But should he have? Art and expression for most child celebrities had always been about making the most of their juvenile brands and setting trends. Jaden Smith did just that as a child, with his stellar displays in huge franchise movies like Karate Kid, featuring Jackie Chan.
He's strong. Check it on.
Before the release of the movie, critics poked fun at the difficulty behind a black kid at the helm of one of the most important franchises in the Chinese Kung Fu Gold, like the Karate Kid franchise. However, fans speculated that Jaden's last name, Smith, became the only currency that bought him any hype in Hollywood in the first place, or even got him in a room with a legend of the game like Jackie Chan. However, there was only one way to kill these doubts in their cradle: to finally show that being a legacy name in Hollywood wasn't a requirement to be exactly successful, and hard work paired with raw talent definitely pays more dividends. Fast forward to the release of the movie, his performance, specifically his training routines, and his application in the arena had the world shaking at his feet. But more than the Karate Kid franchise, he also had some success with movies like After Earth and Intergalactic. However, these aren't the only memories that the internet has of Jaden Smith. He practically grew up in the media, with most of his personal life documented by paparazzi, who followed him around even as a child. However, his greatest social scandal came from his reference to Tyler, the creator, as his boyfriend, fueling speculations about his sexuality. The Hollywood rumors that surrounded his persona as a child and teenager, exploring and somewhat making discoveries about his sexuality, saw him make some bold choices regarding style archives, wardrobe decisions, and the companies that he kept. Although he has neither backed up the claim nor debunked it, the companies that he kept continued to fuel the homosexual allegations. Jaden had a habit of breaking societal norms and being at the forefront of the representation of gender roles. He confidently wore dresses, skirts, heels, and every other thing you mostly find on a drag queen. But is that who Jaden really is? Or is it just another attempt at visibility and acceptance in every community across the United States and globally? Regardless of his reasons, these suggestive decisions were more than enough for any comedian to latch onto. Chris Rock only needed Jada's baldness to do some real damage. Just imagine what Dave, Cat Williams, or any other comedian coming for Will could do with that much on Jaden. But just aside from Dave, how have other comics responded to Will and his son? Haunted by the jokers. Will deliberately smacking up a legend of the game like Chris was always going to shake some trees. However, he shook more than a rather disturbing one. The comic tree. Bill Burr, another legend of the game, immediately took sides, calling Will out and describing his actions as cruel. However, he did not stop there. He, in fact, laid into the people who watched the actions unfold, and yet they clapped their hands euphorically when the 53-year-old climbed the stage to receive his award for his performance on King Richard.
Will Smith, King Richard. And the Oscar goes to...
behaving almost as though he hadn't just slapped one of the most reputable comedians in the world. His opinion opened another Pandora's box, leading to more questions than answers. Will had truly just committed a heinous act, and on one of the biggest stages in Hollywood, yet he was allowed to receive his award. What happened to instant accountability? Maybe Cat Williams wasn't crazy after all. Speaking of accountability and how the rules sometimes are bent for the biggest machineries of the media, Cat Williams has been exceptionally expressive, claiming that some black comedians push so much for success that they did not care how they made it happen, even if they had to wear dresses and make backroom shady deals with the Illuminati. Although the allegations felt real to most critics, Cat was rather confident discussing them in interviews with Shannon Sharpe and even on his own specials. But again, it is Cat Williams, one of the most controversial public figures in the United States, who has a knack for simply stirring up a storm just because he feels like it. However, Will's punishment, which felt like a simple slap on the wrist for his action, gave some serious oxygen to Cat's fiery comments. While he carefully picked his words, deliberately avoiding mentioning Will Smith and Chris Rock, claiming that he had nothing to say about them, he criticized Will in other contexts. Cat was rather expressive about Hollywood, claiming that black men wearing dresses openly in the media was unnatural. He described it as a control system that showed white supremacy even in the supposedly fair and square Hollywood. Although he made no mention of Will or Jaden, the timing of his interviews was good enough for critics to point fingers in Jaden's direction. While Will was also shown wearing a dress in 2019, preparing for the launch of Aladdin, Jaden's continuous suggestive behaviors and bold fashion choices had finally come back to haunt him on the biggest stages. Although he seemed completely unfazed by the constant shade thrown his way, sources close to the situation claimed that Dave had a special coming up that was finally going to rip into Jaden unapologetically. What's next for Jaden, and does Dave really have it in him to go that far? Safety is off. Talking about some of the most unhinged comedians that the United States created, Dave ranks very high at the top of that list. Although he had never been the type to avoid a discourse because of its volatility or acceptance in the media, his fans in recent times had described the 52-year-old as a bit more filtered than he used to be many years ago. For some context, he had a sketch that aired from 2003 to 2006 where he drew up parodies of governance as Black Bush, a word on the then U.S. president's name at the time. He had America in a chokehold, pushing agendas that were against the racial structures and institutionalized racism, and boldly calling out the government. Although it was not particularly a new concept where a comic trolls the government, he took it well past the lines most people wouldn't cross. So if you ever imagine Dave's propensity to take things too far, the Black Bush answers that question. But Dave never got stuck in the past anyway. He challenged society as much as he experienced it. He checked every change and pulled no punches whenever he attacked. It was scathing, visceral, and unapologetic, but most importantly, it was never personal. He was simply attacking superstructures that he believed had started to tower over what normal used to be. For context, he once challenged the political incorrectness of anyone using the word faggot. Over the years, the word had become only acceptable in society when used by gay people, but good old Dave was not having any of it. However, since Will lunged at Chris, sources close to the 52-year-old believe that fans might be getting the 2003 Dave back. That was the Dave with the unfiltered, unadulterated truth that almost seemed superbly personal. But can the Smith family handle this rolling stone? Although insiders in the Smith family claim that Jaden and Will especially have developed thick skin over the years, learning to be impervious to media attacks, sources close to the situation believe this was not going to be the usual media attack. The whispers through the grapevine suggest that Dave might not only be taking the safety off, but could also be planning to bring every comedian together, young and old, possibly running it into something bigger, like a wake-up call to every other comic, which could create a mass movement against cancel culture by possibly making an example of Will Smith. While Dave has neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, the discussion is wild and trendy. Whether the 52-year-old pursues this massive death or simply lets bygones be, only time will tell. Do you think the comic world will eventually move on from Will's disrespect and his son backing him up? Is there a chance that Dave really launches this attack? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.